We'll start. Okay. All right.
Hello and welcome to the second of our series on gender-based violence with Roxanne Francis. And to begin, we'll do our land acknowledgement, acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging their presence and this land reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of our Indigenous people here in Canada. So welcome to our second of our gender-based violence session with Roxanne Francis. Last time she did a session on the myths associated with gender-based violence. Today she'll be focusing on intimate partner violence. Roxanne Francis is an award-winning registered social worker and psychotherapist, consultant and speaker who's been helping people access tools to change their lives for over 10 years. She's the owner of Francis Psychotherapy and Consulting Services, where she provides psychotherapy to individuals in the community, clinical supervision to other therapists, and consultation to various organizations addressing topics such as mental health in the workplace, diversity, equity, and inclusion, burnout, children's mental health, parenting, and women's issues. Roxanne is a media mental health expert and often shares her insight on various newscasts, as well as on print and online publications. Welcome, Roxanne.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's good.
Go ahead.
It's really good to be here again. And tonight we're going to be focusing on the different kinds of intimate partner violence and how it affects young women and individuals who identify as women. So I am going to attempt to share my screen and we will get going. Towards the end, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. All right. All right, so we're going to be talking about intimate partner violence, and here's the agenda of all the things that I hope to cover. We've already done land recognition, which is great, so I'll bypass that. And then we'll do a brief intention setting. We'll talk about the types of intimate partner violence. We'll talk about children and intimate partner violence, its impact on teen girls and young women, what it looks like in high school and post-secondary, as well as human trafficking. Actually, I will say just a little bit, I know that Dr. Tapo already did a land acknowledgement, but I just want to say that as an individual who chose to move to Canada, oftentimes, sometimes I will say collective we, in terms of individuals who identify as Black, some of us will say, we'll call ourselves settlers. And while that has some truth to it, I know that the same colonialism that resulted in my ancestors residing in the Caribbean are the same colonial forces that resulted in me moving here for the want of a better life. And it's the same colonial forces that have resulted in many First Nation communities not being able to live on the land in the way that they choose. And I copy Dr. Tapo's sentiments just in terms of land acknowledgement, but acknowledging that the land in which we live and have fun and work and learn is a land that that doesn't necessarily belong historically to us. And so I am quite privileged and grateful to exist on this land. So let's just set an intention and have a brief reflection. The topic that we are continuing to talk about tonight is not a mild topic. It is not a light topic. It is not the kind of discussion that people have over scones and tea. This is heavy information, and I want you to really just think about how these discussions make you feel. I want you to create some safety for yourself. So if it means that you need to get up for a minute or two, take a deep breath, grab a drink of water before you rejoin us, then please, by all means, do so. I want you to do what you can to create some safety for yourself. These are hard topics regarding intimate partner violence, and we will talk about things that may activate a sense of discomfort within you. So I encourage you to pay attention to that. And I also want you to reflect on whether or not these issues apply to yourself or your loved ones, because quite often I have these discussions and many people are very quick to dismiss them and say, well, they don't relate to me. And I challenge you to really think about whether or not you think these issues apply to yourself or to people that you love. And at the end of the session, there will be a couple of numbers that you might be able to call if you do believe that you need some support. I also want to share a brief word on the idea of worthiness. Oftentimes when people are on the receiving end of intimate partner violence, it really impacts their sense of worthiness. It causes them to believe that they're not worthy of love. They're not worthy of a love that is not painful. And it really reduces their self-esteem, their sense of confidence. And so I really just want to reiterate that everyone under the sound of my voice, everyone who will watch this later, is worthy of connection and relationship and love in a place of safety, in a place of trust, and in a manner that does not inflict pain. Okay. So we're going to go right in to the different types of intimate partner violence. And the first kind that I want to mention is the kind that people tend to think about when they hear about abuse or violence in relationships, which is physical abuse. And most people are familiar with this from the news, from movies, from social media, from hearing about it in society. And that includes any kind of violence that would cause physical harm. So hitting, punching, kicking, slapping, choking, burning, scarring, being hurt with a weapon. It comes in all kinds of different forms in different societies and different areas. You hear things about people being drenched in boiling water, or being hurt with acid, like all kinds of different methods of physical harm. It also includes driving recklessly, restricting someone's movement, and making another person feel physically unsafe. And when I say restricting movement, I want to be very careful to explain what I mean by that, because sometimes I will meet with young women who will say, well, I've never been hit, I've never been punched, I've never been slapped or kicked. But then in the midst of our discussion, they'll say things like, I was locked out of my apartment in a snowstorm and I had no shoes on. That's a kind of physical abuse. I was, pushed out of the car, out of a moving vehicle. That's physical abuse. I was, my keys were thrown over the balcony and I couldn't have access to the things that I needed. That's a kind of physical abuse. And it may not seem like you're getting physically harmed, but you're restricting the other person's movement. You're preventing them from moving around with free will. And you're intimidating their feeling of physical safety. These are the things that comprise of physical abuse. Someone grabs your hair, You know, a lot of times, and we'll speak to the experience of high school and university college students, but a lot of times girls will say, oh, you know, my partner just grabbed my hair. He didn't hit me. I didn't get a bruise, so I'm fine. And they don't identify with being harmed physically. So I want you to be aware, things like being spat on. These are all things that comprise of physical abuse. So just be mindful. If you find yourself in scenarios where these things are happening, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. This is not quote unquote normal, no matter what you see in your neighborhood or culture or on TV, what society deems as acceptable, this is not acceptable. Okay, so let's get into sexual abuse. When I speak about sexual abuse, people generally think of rape. And yes, that is a kind of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse comprises of any kind of forced sexual interaction. So that does include rape. It also includes any other kind of sexual interaction that you have to be overly coerced in. Anything that you want to be mindful that consent is something that is always in play when it comes to sexual behavior. A lot of times young women will not have recognized that they were abused sexually, or they were raped because they thought they were on a date. And even though they didn't say yes, they thought that it was okay. Sexual abuse also comprises of using sex as a weapon. So, you know, harming someone through the act of sex, or withholding sex to achieve a specific purpose. There's the term sex slave has been thrown about quite loosely. So controlling someone's movements through sex, using sex as a punishment, as a consequence, or any other kind of sexual activity. It does not necessarily mean penetrative intercourse. It can mean any other kind of sexual behavior, including forcing someone to watch pornography. Then there is also criticism based on sexual performance. Oftentimes, one partner will tell the other that they're no good at this thing or the other thing, and constantly use it to berate them and make them feel less of a person. That is a kind of sexual abuse. Also using sex to control someone's actions, and that goes into also using sex as a consequence, or using it to encourage someone to do something. You know, telling someone that you won't have sex with them unless this thing happens, or if they do something, then this kind of sex will happen. We have to be mindful that sex, particularly in the realm of marriage, can also be abusive. It wasn't until, I can't remember, it might have been in the 1960s in North America, particularly in the United States, where cases were brought to court to suggest that you know, sexual abuse can actually happen in the realm of marriage. Just because someone is in a marriage does not mean that that their body can be given up or used at someone else's discretion, at someone else's will. As long as you do not agree, or you don't consent, or you're uncomfortable in any way, then that should not happen. So yes, sexual abuse can occur in the marital relationship. The other thing to keep in mind is, you know, in some cultures, girls get married at a very young age. That in itself is also abusive. Children should not be engaging in intercourse or in any kind of sexual act. That kind of consent can only happen if you are an adult doing things of your own free will, not concerned about what will happen as a repercussion. Okay, so the other kind is verbal abuse. And I put emotional abuse in brackets because when someone is being yelled at all the time, when someone is being called names, regardless of what the name is, even if it's for something as quote unquote mild as telling the person that they're stupid, when they're hearing this day in, day out, criticizing their size, talking to them about what they can do or what they can't do, belittling their capability, putting them down, belittling them in front of others. All of these things, it's considered emotional abuse because all of these things impact how you feel about yourself. You know, if you're constantly making fun of the other person, particularly in front of other people, not necessarily all the time, but particularly in front of other people, it impacts the person's self-esteem, it impacts their sense of self-worth. It causes them to feel like they're not good enough, that they can't do certain things, that they're not human enough, that they are not worthy of safety and love, compassion, and respect. If you or someone else that you know is in a relationship where they may not be physically harmed, they may not be sexually harmed, but if they're constantly being yelled at, if they're constantly being put down, if they're constantly being made fun of, these are things that do comprise of verbal abuse / emotional abuse. I also want you to think of what I call psychological, other people might call it mental abuse. And people might say, is that a real thing? I mean, you're not really being harmed, are you? Well, the truth of the matter is, particularly these days, we are being awoken to the idea that our mental health is just as important as our physical health. And psychological abuse or mental abuse is a kind of non-physical behavior that does erode your mental health. It not only causes you to second guess your self-worth or your self-esteem, but it also causes you to think that you are quote unquote crazy, that you cannot trust your own judgment. And so this includes things like intimidation, gaslighting. And if you're not familiar with that term, gaslighting means almost tricking the other person to think that the things that they saw or heard or witnessed actually did not happen. And in an intimate partner relationship, that can be something like hiding someone's keys and having them look for it. The partner's probably helping them look for it and having them feel like they didn't just put the keys on the table when the other partner knew that they picked them up from the table and hid them away. Or moving the vehicle in the middle of the night and having the other partner wake up thinking, did I do that? And having them believe that they actually did that. When those things happen, it causes the abused partner to think that they're actually losing their mind. It messes with their sense of judgment. And so when they feel like their own judgment cannot be trusted, then what happens is that they start to depend even more on the abusive partner. And in abusive relationships, in violent relationships, the core of the abuse or the violence is control. And if the abusive partner is able to control the victim, then they have, won. They are in control. Part of the control is isolation. When the abusive partner gets into a relationship with the victim, then they pull them away from family, they pull them away from friends. The social circle gets smaller and smaller. You hear things like, I don't like your friend, or I don't like your sister, they don't like me, they're tacky, I don't trust them. Let's move to the country. You don't have to work anymore. I will take care of us. Those things tend to happen and it results in significant isolation. Then what happens is when you find yourself being abused, there is no one to reach out to. And under the realm of gaslighting, what tends to happen is once you start to think that something strange is happening, you feel so ashamed of sharing that you keep it to yourself. You start to think no one will believe me because my judgment can't be trusted. People will think I'm crazy. And so the victim does not reach out, and it strengthens the hold that the abusive partner has on them. Okay. Then there's also financial abuse. I'm not sure if you've heard of this term before, but financial abuse happens to be when the abusive partner restricts the access to money or financial assets in the relationship. And that can look like taking control of the bank accounts, taking control of the person's bank cards, credit cards, restricting spending. I've seen situations where partners will ask to see the receipts every single time for every single thing. I have seen in my practice where women have gone out and, they have bought an ice cream cone and the partner wants to see the receipts, or the partner hits the roof about the spending of, $2.50 on an ice cream cone because they have such a strong hold on the financial resources in the relationship. There are also things like using the other person's credit. And so what that can look like is opening accounts in the partner's name, but making large purchases rather in the other person's name, vehicles, houses, leasing apartments, student loans, all of these things, purchasing furniture, retail cards. These are things that tend to happen in the other person's name. And so what happens is that the other person, the victim in the relationship, has their credit ruined. And so they feel like they don't have a leg to stand on should they need to leave and start a new life. Oftentimes, victims in these relationships will say things like, I can't leave, I don't have a bank account. Or I can't leave, I have no cash. I can't leave, I have no money to put gas in my car. I can't leave, they'll track my spending because we have a joint account. They will be so angry if I open an account somewhere else. I have to hide all of these things and I can't deal with the stress of hiding. So the financial abuse really does come into play because it is a measure of control. It is a significant measure of control, and it results in the further dependence on the abuser, and it restricts the victim's mobility. It restricts their actions. Things like the abuser being aware of the accounts for the telephone, for the debit card, for your Netflix account, for your Amazon account. They have all the passwords for everything. This constitutes financial abuse, and it causes individuals to have to stay in the abusive relationship. So then there is culture/identity, and this is not something that is talked about on a regular basis. What that tends to look like is when someone's culture or their religious community or their religious norms are used to control their behavior. And so what that tends to look like is, for example, a family might move to Canada or North America from their home country, and the one partner might be prohibited from leaving the apartment because they don't speak the language. They are unable to, or restricted, or told they cannot open a bank account because they don't speak the language. They are told that, because of culture, you cannot leave the home. You must stay here. Um, you know, for example, in some cultures, being a member of the queer community is significantly and strongly frowned upon. And so one person might threaten to out someone else if there is, sex out of wedlock, which might be looked down upon or frowned upon significantly. Then one person might say, if you don't do as I want you to do, then I will let everyone else know that we are engaging in a sexual relationship, and that will not go well for you. Oftentimes, the community will threaten to ostracize or excommunicate one individual if they do not fall in line, so to speak. That is sometimes seen in communities where they're extremely tight-knit, where they're the only ones who speak a particular language. If they live in the countryside and they don't have access to urban resources, then what that means is living outside of the community or living independently, it will not be successful for you. I've heard stories of individuals telling me that, if I have to live outside of the community, then I will probably wind up in sex trafficking, or I will wind up in sex work, or I will wind up being a drug addict or living on the street, because I will have absolutely no support. And so because the threat of no support is so significant, then that person will fall in line with whatever it is that community or group of people want for them to do, despite their own desire or despite their own thoughts. Again, there are restrictions based on language or geographic unfamiliarity. If you are not familiar with the neighborhood, then chances are you are unlikely to head out and venture into the community without that person beside you. And that person beside you could very well be your abuser. And because of that, you are unlikely to report to the authorities or to anyone who could support you that this person next to me is actually an abuser, because you are now so culturally dependent upon them for your very survival, for the survival of children. And so individuals will just fall in line and continue to fall prey to the abusive behaviors. Okay, so let's talk about children and intimate partner violence. Where do children come in? Can children be harmed by intimate partner violence? They certainly can. They can be harmed in the obvious way, which is being hurt themselves. So the adults in the home can physically harm these children, put their life at risk. And in this way, they're in significant physical danger. Their lives are in danger. And usually when this happens, child welfare will step in. Child welfare workers will come into the family. Sometimes they will remove the children. Sometimes they will engage in what they call kinship care. I'm not a child welfare expert, so I'm using these terms loosely, but they will arrange for kinship custody, which means that they will remove the child from the home where they live with immediate relatives and will place them in a home with maybe an aunt, a grandparent, a godparent, some kind of extended family, rather than placing them with strangers in foster care. So that is how children are hurt immediately and physically. Children can be hurt by the abuser, I use the term himself or themselves. Whoever the abuser is in the relationship, sometimes the children are hurt by that abuser. Other times, the children will be hurt by the other partner who is the victim, sometimes because that victim is now completely frustrated. They're overwhelmed. They don't know what else to do. They're extremely angry and they cannot unleash their anger on the abuser because it is unsafe for them. And so they now unleash the anger out on the defenseless children. And so children become hurt physically in these situations. The other ways that children can be harmed in these relationships where there's intimate partner violence is by witnessing violent behavior. And oftentimes individuals will say to me, well, Roxanne, they're just witnessing the behavior. They're not actually being harmed. Well, being a witness to the behavior, watching one person harm another person is quite harmful to children. It impacts their mental wellness. Hearing arguments as well can impact a child's mental wellness. I've worked with children before where, a parent will come in and say, my 4-year-old or 5-year-old is constantly wetting the bed. They are throwing chairs at school. They refuse to go to sleep alone at night, and I don't know what to do. And after we peel back the layers and ask the questions and ask more questions, you begin to find out that the biological father or previous partner was abusive in the relationship and would do something like lock the child in their room in the dark, or would hurt the other parent, or there would be a lot of yelling and screaming and the throwing of things in the home. And even though the abusive partner is no longer in the picture, the witnessing the violence or being harmed themselves, that is having an impact on the mental wellness of the child. And oftentimes when children act out or they have challenging behaviors, people don't recognize that what's actually happening is that the mental health issue is being played out in the behavior. So children are having trouble self-regulating. They're biting other children at school all of a sudden. They are yelling and screaming and swearing. In kindergarten and grade 1 classrooms, they call these children the room wreckers, or they say they trash the classrooms. And that's when, they rip everything off the walls or throw the chairs or destroy artwork in the classroom. And so, children, they may not even be physically harmed, but they are definitely mentally scarred by witnessing violent behavior, by hearing the violent arguments in the home. And not only in childhood, but what tends to happen is that they eventually start to struggle with their relationships in their teens and in their adulthood. I came across a case a few years ago where there was a young girl who was 14 years old, she had already had the opportunity to be arrested by police. She was an extremely violent young girl. She would start a fight at the drop of a hat. And when I say fight, I don't mean verbal argument. She would pin someone on the floor and punch and punch and punch and punch. For the smallest infraction, for someone looking at her the wrong way, she would really punch their lights out. And after doing some work with her for a while, it became apparent that she was in a violent home when she was a little girl. Her mother was being physically harmed when this 14-year-old was in utero, so before she was born. When she was born, the violence continued. There was violence in the home up until she was about 7 years old. And then she was apprehended from the home by child welfare workers. And so while she may not have been physically harmed in the home, she was mentally scarred. She could not self-regulate. She did not know how to de-escalate a conflict. Every verbal conflict for her became a physical one because that is what she saw. And it was starting to have far-reaching implications where now at 14 years old, she already had the record of being arrested before. And so we have to be mindful that in relationships where there is violence, children are being scarred, they're being harmed. They also have poor coping mechanisms. I'll give you another case. There was another young lady that I had worked with for a number of years, from she was about 15 years old until she was about maybe 20 years old. I worked with her. This young lady was having issues with an eating disorder. She was self-harming. She had to go to hospital on multiple occasions for in order to keep herself, in order for individuals to keep her safe from herself. She was a significant suicide risk. And it turns out that in her childhood, there was intimate partner violence between her parents. She has told me that she does not have a memory of her parents not fighting. As far back as she could go with her memory, she does not remember peace in her home. She remembers fighting, yelling, pushing, shoving, things being thrown across the room. She remembers hiding under the kitchen table. She remembers screaming for her parents to stop it. She remembers police coming into the home. And so eventually she got diagnosed with a personality disorder, and she struggled with relationships throughout her teen years. She became involved in relationships that were unsafe for her. She was self-harming, and eventually she started using narcotics. And it has taken a number of years in order for her to sort of come back to who she was, all because there was intimate partner violence in the home. And so if we can start to recognize what intimate partner violence looks like, then we can not only take care of ourselves as the people who are on the receiving end of this violence, but we can take care of the younger people who are around us. Oh, also, I also want to point out here the phenomenon of intergenerational trauma. And what that means is that trauma happens to a child, so they experience trauma and they live through trauma. It gets stored in their bodies because that's where trauma lives. And as they get older, they have trouble self-regulating. They have trouble with positive or healthy coping mechanisms. And they take that dysregulation into their into their adult relationships. Then, in their adult relationships, their connection with other people, that becomes unhealthy. Eventually, they have children. Then they play out that unhealthy behavior in front of the children. There might be more intimate partner violence in front of these children. And then these children now grow up with the same issue. And so it goes from one generation to the next until someone is actually able to get some support for what has happened to them. Then that cycle will continue. So, children grow into teens in difficult relationships and poor coping mechanisms, who grow into adults with difficult relationships and poor coping mechanisms, who then have children and they parent them in the same way. And so it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So how does this impact people in high school and college? As I mentioned in our last talk, violence against women tends to peak in a woman's life at around the age of 15. And there are many schools of thought as to why that is. But the one that tends to prevail is that at around that age, girls are starting to shift into the cusp of womanhood, but they're not yet completely independent. They are still at the stage where they want to please the people around them. there is more willingness to tolerate poor behavior around you because you want to be a part of something more than yourself. You want to be a part of the group. You want to be accepted by the people around you. You don't want to be shunned by your partner. You want a partner. A lot of young girls at that age, they want to be in a relationship. They want to model what they see on TV. And they're not yet aware of what abuse looks like. And so when it begins to happen to them, while they're uncomfortable, they don't want to say, hey, don't do that. That's not comfortable for me. And so they tolerate the behavior and find themselves in these abusive relationships. In that age group, around that age group, high school into college and university, women or women identified individuals have the desire to make their partners happy. They also want to hide anything negative from their primary caregivers. So from their parents or their guardians, they don't want anyone to know that they're being shoved into lockers. They don't want anyone to know that they got punched in the back and they have a bruise, because they don't want anyone to know that they're not handling themselves well. They want to be seen in a very positive light. And so there is this pretense that everything is okay, even though deep down on the inside, we know that there is something wrong here, that I should probably ask for help. But we mask that because, our society has this way of saying, you should be okay. Don't tell anyone that you're not okay. Just grin and bear it and just pretend. And so women in particular become masters at pretending that everything is okay when indeed it is not. It is in these stages of the life cycle of women's lives that they begin to learn to put up with sexual abuse. We begin to learn to put up with sexual coercion. This is where the lines get blurred when it comes to consent, where we feel like if we don't consent, then we might actually hurt the feelings of our partners or of the people around us. When we don't want to engage in certain kinds of sexual activities, we might be called names, we might be teased, be told that we're babies or that we're kids. And no teenager at the age of 17, 18, 19 years old wants to be told that, particularly a teenage girl. And so teenage girls tend to just go along with what is being requested of them, what is being demanded, what they're being coerced into, even though they're feeling extremely uncomfortable. Young girls will also, or teen girls and young women will also downplay the seriousness of the situation. If they are, being sexually assaulted, then they'll just say, it's not that big of a deal. If they are being harmed, if their arm is being twisted physically, or even metaphorically, they will say, well, if I had only done such and such, if I had only agreed, if I had only done what I was asked, then this would not have happened. Next time I will do better. And so we downplay the seriousness of what is happening. And oftentimes young girls don't recognize the danger that they're in. Teen girls, college girls do not recognize the danger that they are in. I just want to, there's something else that I want to add, but I'm not sure if it's on the other slide. Yes, here it is. So in terms of high school and college, there is as I mentioned before, there is the strong desire to fit in to the social group. And that strong desire to fit in the social group can put young women in significant danger. It can put them at high risk for intimate partner violence. At this stage, particularly at the college university level, there is more independence from parents. You are away from home for the majority of the day. A lot of university students won't even attend school close to home, right? So many students move away for university or college. And so they have this newfound freedom or independence from their parents. They're having to make these significant life choices by themselves for the very first time. It does not mean that they're always making the wrong decision, but it also does not mean that they're making the right decision. I hear many people say that this stage in life is a stage in which we're supposed to make mistakes. And yes, there is some truth to that, but we want to stay away from the mistakes that result in being in abusive relationships. When we are away at school or when we are away for the day in high school or college, it is easier to hide things from parents. If you are in, I don't know, your chemistry lab, and after chemistry lab, your partner hits you or asks you to do something or calls your names or puts you down or takes your bank card or your credit card, it's easy to hide that from your parents because you're not getting home until 5:30, 6 o'clock. It's easy to pretend that these things don't happen to you because they happen to you outside of the realm of home. It happens to you outside of the realm of that safety, that cocoon. Or sometimes, you're away from September and you don't see your family again until Thanksgiving or Christmas. And so it is very easy to find ourselves in violent situations with partners with no sense of protection. It is also the time in one's life, in terms of developmental stages. It is a time in one's life where you are now pulling away from your parents. You are forming your own opinions about life. You no longer agree with them for everything. You fight with them more often. And when we pull, it's natural and it's expected that you begin to pull away and differentiate from your parents. But when that starts to happen, we form closer bonds or ties with our friends. And sometimes our friends at that age, at 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, sometimes our friends don't necessarily give the best advice. They're also trying to figure life out. They don't have the benefit or the advantage of years of life experience that parents might have. And so, your friend might say something like, well, just engage in the oral sex and so he won't have to yell at you anymore. And that may not be the best advice. And so you might find yourself in a precarious position. Because you're away from home, you will have less protection, less physical protection, but also less emotional support. The act of being away from home physically really does separate you from the safety that you might find in home. And I do understand that not everyone's home is a safe place, but the idea of your home community or your extended family or your adult friends who have become family for you, oftentimes we are away from that cocoon. We are away from that safety net, and it leaves us very exposed. It leaves us very, very susceptible to the pitfalls in life. And so that leads me to the next slide, which is on trafficking. So why am I talking about trafficking? What does that have to do with abuse? People might say trafficking has nothing to do with me. That happens to those girls who they don't know what they're doing. That happens to those girls who are living on the street. That happens to those girls who work in the sex industry. I don't do drugs. I don't even smoke cigarettes. That could never happen to me. Why are you bringing that up? I am bringing this up specifically because it can happen to anyone. I'll say this again. This can happen to anyone. And it is not just happening in urban areas. It is not just happening in the downtown of your city. This is happening in the countryside. This is happening in the suburbs. This is happening where it's not a busy metropolis. This is not something that is only relegated to downtown Toronto. This happens every and anywhere. And so the one thing that I will say is that sex trafficking is not like the movies where the girl is kidnapped or she's taken from the street or she's sold, across the black market and smuggled from one country to the next. Do those things happen? Yes, they do. But this isn't, I think there's a movie that was made a few decades ago called Taken, where some girls traveled across the country, internationally. And when they got to the country that they were going to, they got kidnapped and they were sold and they were given drugs and alcohol and they were forced into a life of sex trafficking. Does that happen? Yes, it does. I'm sure it does. But what I'm talking about is not that. What I am talking about is where a girl might, not get along with her parents, or she has moved out of her parents' home at a young age, and she meets a gentleman. It's usually a man who courts her, right? He starts to take her out. He starts to groom her, if you will. Tells her that she's beautiful, listens to her, believes in her dreams, tells her that she's right about her parents. They don't understand her, but he understands her. He starts to probably take her to different places, and he tells her that she's, again, he tells her that she's beautiful. He tells her that she's smart. He's never met anyone like her. He tells her that he's in love. She starts to fall in love with the person that she thinks he is. And then he might say, you can stay with me. You can live here. He might start to lavish all kinds of treats and luxuries on her. She can get her nails done once a week. She gets her hair done all the time. He buys her new clothes. She gets the latest, fanciest phone. She gets new shoes, all of these wonderful, wonderful, amazing things. A lot of girls that I've spoken to cannot believe their luck, that this is their amazing life. And then after a while, one of two things tend to happen. One is that he might say something like, he's gotten himself in a bit of a financial jam, and the only way out of it is for them to make some money real quick. Would she mind doing him this one favor, this one time, and it will garner them this much cash, and he will be able to get out of the jam that he is in. He loves her so much. He will only allow her to do this one time. He'll ensure that she's safe. And oftentimes, by this point, the girl involved is so smitten, is so enamored with this person, with her boyfriend, that eventually, even though initially she might be disgusted, eventually she says yes. And after she says yes, he might show her either like a video. I have recorded what you've done, and now you need to do it again. No, you just need to keep doing it. And it now becomes a pattern. or she believes that they're still in a relationship and this is now what is required. Or the flip side, the other story that I've heard quite often is that he will now tell her all of these things that you've become accustomed to, getting the nails done, getting the hair done, getting new clothes, getting new shoes, the latest phone, the latest watch. All of these things cost money, and now you need to pay me back. And this young girl who has no job, away from her parents or anyone that she's ever loved, she's now living with him and now dependent on him. And no, the only other option is to be on the street. And oftentimes she will say, okay. And, usually girls will say things to me like, I consented. I was the one who said, okay. And this is one of the reasons why many women do not report their abuser or report their pimp, because they believe that they consented to this behavior. But if the only options are sex work or street, or sex work or beat you up, then it really isn't a choice. And so women are led to believe that they have been given a choice and that they chose this life. They really didn't choose this life. They were duped into this life. And so it really does start with the dating or grooming. And then it eventually goes into payback, or can you do me this favor? And oftentimes when it's framed as a favor, at the end of it all, the individual, the boyfriend or the pimp might come back and say something like, I'm so proud of you. I can't believe you did this. This is so amazing. Now I need you to do it again. And before you know it, girls are caught up in this lifestyle. And it is extremely difficult to get extricated from this lifestyle. And even when a woman does leave this lifestyle, it is also just as hard to bring charges to the individual or individuals who are the abusers in this situation. The girl or the woman becomes extremely dependent. And what tends to happen sometimes is that the woman who's trafficked first will eventually start to recruit young girls on this person's behalf. Sometimes these girls or these women will go so far as to think that they are in relationships and they do not believe that this individual is a pimp. They believe that this individual is actually their partner or their boyfriend. And we're saving up this money so we can buy a condo together downtown. We're saving up this money so we can buy a car. We're saving up this money so that I can go back to school. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The woman in this scenario loses the loss of control in every aspect of her life. She is now told when she can sleep, how long she can sleep, where she sleeps. We're sleeping at this location today, and tomorrow we're sleeping at that hotel. You are going to be in room 317 and I will be upstairs in room 417. They are told, when they can eat, what they can eat, how often they can eat. There is no control over who they engage with physically, how often, whether or not they get to keep money. And I must reiterate here that there are individuals who are involved in sex work, and that is something that they choose to do. And the difference is that those who choose to get into sex work, they have control over who they engage with, how often they engage, where they engage, and they keep their money. So those who are being trafficked, they do not keep their money. They have no control over when they engage, who they engage with, how often, when they sleep, if they sleep, what they eat, if they eat, what they wear. None of these things they have control over. And back to the whole idea of feeling like you are in a relationship, what tends to happen is that a trauma bond develops, and you feel, or the individual here feels as though they're still connected to the person who is trafficking them. They feel like they cannot leave because, now you've told this person all of your hopes and dreams. You've told this person how you were assaulted as a child. You told this person about how volatile your home life was. This person may have picked you up when you were on your last $5, and you feel like you cannot leave because you're so connected to them. Again, the core of this, just like the rest of intimate partner violence, the core is control. And so if someone else has control over your life, if someone else has control over your movements, over your finances, over your sexual experiences, over who you are able to connect with, your family, your friends, your relatives, this is an unsafe situation. If you have become completely dependent on this individual, this is an unsafe situation. And I'm not talking about a parenting relationship, because when young people are younger, parents are in charge, right? And as they get older, what is supposed to happen is that parents are supposed to release some of that control so the individual can flourish and grow into an independent adult. If you find that you are not having any kind of independence, this is something that you need to be aware of. And as I mentioned before, trafficking is happening not just in the downtown core of Toronto, of Ottawa, of Vancouver, of Montreal, across North America. This is happening in the suburbs. This is happening in the country. This is happening actually in high school. And a lot of young people, a lot of teachers, a lot of parents are not aware that, high school boys are becoming pimps, and they are trafficking high school girls. I know that we're in a pandemic situation currently as I speak, but forever how long this video might live, there are situations where I have actually had a young woman who used to be trafficked. She told me that she had a friend whose father was pimping his daughter. And what used to happen is that herself and about 3 other girls would go over to their home on the weekend and have sleepovers on the weekend, and they would be trafficked on the weekend, and she would go back home on Sunday night and go to school Monday to Friday, right? And so this was happening in a suburban environment. She was playing volleyball at school on a Wednesday afternoon. She was swimming with the group of her club on a Friday afternoon, but on a Friday night, she would go home, grab her bag, and go to her friend's house where the father would traffic his daughter and her friends. And so I want you to shake off the myths that abuse and intimate partner violence and things like trafficking have to look a particular way. The other thing that's more prevalent with college and university students is the idea of having what has become quite popular, a sugar daddy, where someone will agree to pay off your tuition if you would engage in, initially, women will tell me something like, it would be just going out for lunch, then it would be going with them on dinner dates, and then it became sexual activity, and then it became, you need to sleep with my friends, and then it became, you need to bring your friends or else I will tell your parents about this. And girls begin to get trafficked in university and college. And I want you to be very, very aware of this. It's spoken of very cavalierly as though it's a joke. And it's not a joke. It's quite serious. There was another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention. Yes, escorting, right? That's another thing that's become quite popular, where individuals will choose to go on dates and choose to get paid for going on these dates. And it can, be a door to sex work, and that can be of someone's own free will. But it also has a very slippery slope where if someone is not careful, they can end up in a trafficking situation where they lose control over every aspect of their lives. It is not uncommon for parents to send their daughters off to university away from home, and they end up in a trafficking situation, but they come home every Thanksgiving, they come home every Christmas, they come home for reading week. But when they're at school, this is the kind of life that kind of lifestyle that they are involved in. All right. So I have spoken a lot about intimate partner violence, the different kinds of intimate partner violence, what it can look like, financial abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, cultural abuse, or abuse around identity. These are all things that I want you to keep in mind. And then, how it impacts high school girls, how high school girls do not believe that they're in abusive relationships because he just shoved me. He only called me an awful, degrading name. I didn't get punched in the face. I don't have any bruises. High school girls become masters sometimes of hiding the bruises that they do acquire at the hands of their partners. These are things that I want you to be very, very, very much aware of. I'm not trying to get you to live your life in fear, but I want you to have the awareness. So when these things start to occur, when things start to feel uncomfortable, that you speak to someone about it. Again, these are very, very heavy topics. And so if you feel uncomfortable, if you find yourself, if you feel like you are in relationships that look like the things that I just spoke about, if you have a sister, if you have a best friend, if you have someone in your class or someone on the street who you believe is involved in these kinds of relationships, then or they're exposed to intimate partner violence, or they're in a trafficking situation, there are some numbers here that I would like for you to take note of. And all of these numbers are national numbers in Canada, because this video can be seen across the country. There is the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, there is the Hope for Wellness Helpline, and there is Kids Help Phone. And Kids Help Phone is just for children under 12 years old. They also have a line that is specific to teens. And they also have a text line, which is 6868. So I want you to keep these numbers in mind and access them if you feel like you need some support. Okay, so I've been talking for a while now, so I want to open the floor up for any question or discussion thoughts that you might have as I've come to the end of the formal slide portion of the presentation.
Well, thank you, Roxanne. Thank you for such a comprehensive discussion on intimate partner violence. We don't have any questions at the moment, but I'll just like to repeat that if you want to get in touch with Roxanne, she is a therapist and consultant with francispsychotherapy.com. Feel free to contact her if you have further questions. Also, Future Black Female offers free psychotherapy for Black female youth in Canada, aged 16 to 22. So if you reach out to us via our website, futureblackfemale.com, we have our referral forms. You can get in touch with us. You can also direct message us, DM us on Twitter, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and across our social media. So if you're 16 to 22 and need psychotherapy, so it's not just for gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, but psychotherapy generally, Future Black Female has that service available. Thank you again, Roxanne, for such a comprehensive discussion on intimate partner violence. There are no questions at this moment. I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
Yeah, I would just like to say that, oftentimes when I speak to individuals who have lived through violent relationships, they tend to blame themselves. If I didn't do this or that, then this wouldn't have happened to me. If I had just done what they had asked, this wouldn't have happened to me. If I didn't leave my mother's home, this wouldn't have happened to me. If, there are so many things that we tell ourselves, that we convince ourselves that this is our fault. And the thing that I will say to that is, you are not at fault. This is not your fault. Individuals choose to be violent, and they choose with whom to be violent. People can be violent with their partners, and they choose not to be violent to their bosses at work. They choose not to be violent with their parents. They choose not to be violent with their siblings, but they choose to be violent with their partners. And so this isn't your fault. I've had individuals say to me things like, well, I just thought that this was normal. I just thought that this happened in relationships. No, this is not normal. In relationships, people are not to be put down. People are not to be punched. People are not to be choked. I hear people say things like, well, because I wasn't being physically harmed, I thought everything was fine. Well, it is not fine for you to have an argument and for your partner to quietly put his gun on the coffee table and just let it sit there. That's abusive, right? That is the heights of intimidation, right? I've had clients who will say to me, I was getting ready to go to work and my partner said, I don't want you to go to work. And I said, but I have to go to work. And so he peed all over my shoes, right? These are abusive things, and people don't recognize that it's abusive. If you find yourself saying things like, I might get in trouble if they find out, or, I don't want him to know that I'm here because he'll get mad. If those are the things that are in your mind, chances are you are in an abusive relationship and you need to get yourself some support. I know in our next installment, we'll talk about more. I don't want to, get into too much of that, but it is really, really important to be aware of some of the ways that this can play out. It is not all about, having, black and blue eyes and a swollen face. It can present itself in so many different ways. And it's really, really important to be mindful of how it can play out.
Yes, and I think one of the important things you also pointed out is the withholding, right? Where you're punished by withholding affection. Sometimes your partner can go for days, weeks without talking to you.
Right.
And so you find yourself doing things you're not comfortable with to get them to start speaking to you again. So even that silent treatment that is really punitive. Yes, people get into arguments and might be upset, but when you get into a situation where you're with a partner who withholds affection, who withholds money, who withholds food, or any of the other basic and maybe not so basic needs as a way of punishing you, that is abusive as well.
Mhm.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're absolutely right. I could talk for a while about this. You're absolutely right. I've had young girls, young women rather, 20, 21 years old, who'll say to me, I'm used to silent treatment because my sister and I used to hold grudges all the time when I was a teenager. So I didn't think anything of it. But if you are living with a partner, or if you're in a relationship with a partner and they just completely ignore you like you are not there, after, 1 day, 2 days, it's not so bad. But if people will do this for like weeks at a time, and you start to, it starts to impact you psychologically. And so you're right, we do things that we're not comfortable with just so we can have a sense of normalcy, just so you can feel like I'm okay again, right? And so you want to be mindful of those things. Those things are not okay.
Yes. So thanks again. Our last session with you will be on February the 28th, I think.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thanks again, and
you're welcome.
Have a great evening.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.